Well, good afternoon from sunny, not so funny, sunny Florida today. We live in a lot of we live in Alaska. But hi, I'm Scott Thompson from Scott Art CNC, and I'm going to spend some time today since I'm stuck in a rainy day, making a model, and I was going to share that with all of you today and go through a little bit of how I build models and stuff. So let's see here if I can get us into some software. If you haven't been, I'll share this with you really quick. This is our little Scott Art CNC Etsy page. If you get a chance to go in there, I have several hundred models on there that I've built over the years. I have about 2,500 models. I just don't have them all uploaded there yet. So I'm going to try to get a few more of those uploaded so I can share them. But in the meantime, I'm going to share a little bit of how I make models. So let's go take a look at this one for a few minutes. So I have what's teed up here right now is a little Highland Cow, which is on the surface appears to be a pretty complicated model to make, and it is a little bit complicated if you want to do a great job of it. But I'm going to show you some of the shortcuts I use and how I build models from start to finish. I've already put together some of the steps, so bear with while I go through this. And if you have questions, you can text me here, or you can text me on my Etsy page and ask questions there. And happy to help you out as you work through modeling processes. So this is just a cow I found on the internet that I'm going to play with because he has some kind of really cool features that would make for some fun modeling. So the way I go through this is I'll set these up in my I'll go back through and set up kind of the size I want to do it in. Roughly, I carve them just to set them up a little bit bigger than I'll probably carve. So this is 24 by 24 inches. Probably this will end up being carved around 12 inches, but it gives me some room and space to do that. You can see I've set up all the materials and all that. That's all set up. So now the first thing I do is I'll click on this image, and I play with object properties. And I do that because I want to set this up so that the edges of this are traceable where I can find them. A lot of you guys come over here and use bitmap tracing, and I just don't. I found it takes more time to edit it than it does to just go through and manually trace what I want here. So you'll see if you look in, I'll go to this one. I've already created a rough outline, one set of vectors that covers around the whole cow. And I'm going to show you how I use that first, and I'll briefly show you how I edit vectors. And we're going to pretty quickly get into actually building the model. So I'll take this image right now, and the first thing I'll do is I'll open up my split screen so you can see the results of this. I'll click on the bitmap, and I'm going to come over here in modeling, and I'm going to go to this icon right here. It says create component from selected or imported image bitmap. And a lot of you guys use this to create images, and I know for engraving and such. And you can see it creates essentially a 3D image that you could engrave. It's probably way deeper than what I'd want to use. But that gets us to where we want to, what I would do with it. So I'll turn that off again for just a second because I got too many vectors showing up. So what I do once I have that bitmap sitting there, now I'm going to go back and use this vector that goes around the whole cow. And I'm going to click on that. I'm going to ask Vectric's, this tool right here, to split the vector. So now I have two different components. One is the background, which I don't want. I'm going to hit delete. And the other one is the actual cow. So now I have the cow's furry thing, and I'm going to rename that. We'll use this quite a bit later, but I'm going to call it cow skin. And we're going to go ahead and hide that. And you can see here my other layer has come on. I'm going to hide my bitmap for a minute in these ones, but you can see these are the vectors that I've created to go ahead and try to build this cow model. Now the way I do that, if I turn this off, I take this single vector that I started with, and what I will do is go back, and once I've drawn the outside of it all in detail, I'll go back and go into node editing mode. And for example, I'll come in here and I'll break this apart right here, and I'll break it apart right here. Then I'll click on these, and I'll go into my drawing tools, and I'll start using like these join vectors files right here. And you can see this is giving me, just do a little bit of node editing on this to get the curve that I want on those horns. I'll insert, hit the I key and insert another little vector right there, one right there. And so I'll go back through, and there's the vector that I'll use eventually to build the horn on this side. Same thing here. I'll cut the vectors and create a vector for the ears, for the other horn, around the shape of the face, the eye vector around the front body of the cow, because that's at a different layer than the back body and the belly and the hind legs. So that's how I do kind of a short. I'm not going to get into a node editing class today, but I will go through and show you how we build the model. So let's start out with when I do these model building, I start with the furthest thing back. That's going to be, now I have, this is a 24 inch by 24 inch model, and I allowed myself 4 inches of depth. I don't really intend to use 4 inches of Z depth, but probably about 2.5 inches of Z depth. So then when I get a carving that's about a foot high, it'll be maybe 1 inch or so in Z depth when I shrink this down a little bit. So I'll start with the back part of it. So I've clicked around this vector at the back, and I'll go to modeling. And I tend to put a small amount of base height in. This all can be played with later. And I'm going to give it a little bit of some height. And this is capturing the back legs and the back of his hips. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but we'll just call this, we'll name this rear hips. I'm going to do this pretty quick. I'm not going to hit start a new. Now I'm going to do the next piece I'm going to do beyond that is this whole area here, which is what I call the front shoulders, which would be the next layer out on this little beastie. And I'm going to click that. And you see right now I have it so it's in the combined components right here. We see combined components. I don't want to use that at this point forward. So I'm going to go over here and click on merge the highest points. So you can see they kind of blend together right there. So what I want to do is get this new piece I'm building some more base behind it. And it should push it up and lift it out in front of those hips. And you can start to see how the back of the cow is going to fall in behind where it should be. So I'm going to give that just a little bit over 1/2 inch, and I'm going to give myself some, all this can be played with later, give that a little more roundness that's there right now. And I'm going to call this chest, front legs. I'm going to start a new element. So the next thing I'm going to place on here is the one that I have that I've labeled as the neck. That I'm going to label as the neck. Again, we need some more base for that so it can push itself out beyond. You can see how I've drawn around where the fur should stick out a little bit. So I want that to come out far enough. You can see how he's starting to stack up. That maybe make this a little bit less height in this center area right here and give that a tad more. This is all stuff you can play with, and I don't fuse these or these together so I can play with it later if it doesn't work out correctly. So let's call that neck. We're going to start a new element. He has a rather handsome waft of hair up here on the top of his head. Really cute cows. I carve these sometimes with chainsaw carvings, and they look pretty cool. So this is interesting that this one is not, when I hit apply, nothing happens. What do you guys think that is? So let me close this for a minute. And I'm guessing that this vector is not closed. So I'm going to come back here and hit that, which if I left that vector open, it should now be closed. And I'm going to hit modeling again, hit apply. Oh, I have a vector problem right here. See where that loop is? So let's close that. Do a quick vector repair here. We'll go back to drawing, and I'm going to click on node editing. And I'm just going to entirely sure why that in itself would have kept it from happening, but let's go back to modeling now and try that again. There we go. It kind of looks like a little bit too much like Donald Trump, so gotta fix that. And you can see we went back to combine. I don't want combined. Gonna lower this down a little bit. Oh, not that much. I do want all that shape to show up on the forehead where I've drawn these lines, so I want that to show up right there. Now, this part is possible. This is one of the areas where you have some artistic license, and maybe you want to have it a little less shallow on the base. And another way to get that to show up is to come in here and click on, use the tilt tool. And you can see I've lowered this down to 1.6. I had it up to 1.9 to get that whole area to show up. And we'll hit set on the tilt, and I'll click right there, and I'll click to there, because that's the direction I wanted the tilt in particular. And it was set for 10%. You can see that now that's sticking out the way I want it to, and I can actually lower down the base height quite a bit more. I made a little too much. Perfect. And we'll call that hair. So let's do a couple of antlers on these. Let's horns. They're not antlers. Sorry. And we'll hit apply. Again, we don't want them combining. Maybe a little more height and a little less model height. Get that cut how you want it. So we'll leave the horns. I do a first pass on this just to get the major components in quick, and we'll get into the serious modeling part of this pretty quick. We're going to drop in a pair of some ears in here. Let's do that. Hit apply. Get the ear shape in here. Kind of like where those fell at. So let's just leave those where they are, and we'll call that ears. So there's this long beard down here. That's the next level of stuff I want to put in. So I'm going to drop in the beard. And I think I'm going to do a tilt on the beard too, because I don't want it coming out much further than that on the bottom. I'm going to give it a little bit more height than what you see there. And then I'm going to, again, use tilt And I'm going to ask it to tilt from the bottom up this time. You can see I went way further than I want to. I just want that to be, so that might be useful when it comes time to fix the mouth and stuff. But let's leave the beard like that. We'll call that beard. Start a new component. And now I have a section here I'm going to call face. Push this out quite a bit. Around 2 inches right now. And there we are on face. I think I'm going to go down a little bit. There, and again, I'm going to use tilt at the top. Have it tilt out at the bottom a little bit, just a little bit. I'll leave that where it is for right now. We'll call that face. Maybe with one less letter C. And start a new component. He has kind of a big bang that hangs down here on his fly. I want that to sit fully on top of the face, so I'm going to use it with the combine right here, and I don't want it. You can see what happens if the base is one that's combining on top of the existing piece. So I'm going to come down here and make it about, that's pretty close right there. Make that a little less aggressive. Let's hit apply. Now, a couple things happen here on that last one. Since I had it combined on top, you'll notice that it's on top of the hair. And I don't really want it on top of that hair. I want it underneath that hair. So let's call this bangs. I'll show you how you can play with that. So here's the bangs sitting right here. Here's the hair. So if I move the bangs, or if I move the hair above the bangs are going to be on top of everything from here below them. So if I move the hair below the bangs, I end up with this back on top again. So I'm going to move the hair above it. And we have a starting point for this. Now, as we get further along in the modeling, so what I've basically done here, let me see, I have nose and mouth. I got a chin here to do still. Let's add the chin in really quick. I think I'm gonna shorten that a tad. You can see the chin. I also have the chin sitting right on top of everything. So that's good. We'll call that chin. So what we have done now is completed the basic. This is the basic starting point for modeling. And if you'll look where we're going to end up going with, if I turn the skin back on that we created early on, if you look over here, I'm going to turn that back on. Now the skin again is only going to be, we have to move it up to the top here so it lays on top of all the components. And then let's take the skin for a second and turn this down a bit. So I'll play quite a bit with that shape height for the skin. And at some point in time, you see it starts to pick up the basic shape of what goes on. But we're going to turn that off right now because what I want to work on is, I'm going to pull that back down here. I'm going to go create a new level, insert a new level. I'm going to take these components that are here, because I'm basically happy with those right now. And instead of coming up here and saying bake these, I'm going to hit create component from visible model. And what that does, it leaves all these components intact. So if I want to come back on those later and maybe say make the horns a little bit different or slope those differently or something, I can come back and still separate these or add them on top. But I now have essentially a baked version of this that I can manipulate and play with for the time being with the modeling tools, because the next thing we're going to do is play with the modeling tools. So let's call this, I would rename this, and I'd say, let's just call it cow base. So it's not pretty cow, it's just the base of where we're going to start modeling from. Let's see where we go from modeling here. I haven't played with the eyes very much or the nose or any of that yet, because I just want to get the basics of this thing down. So when I go to model, the next thing I'll do is I'll grab this photo, copy it, paste it, and I'll pull it over here like this so I can look at it. Now this is the part of Aspire. There's a lot of parts of Aspire that are very mechanical. When you use some of the tools, it makes a certain shape. Some of these tools up here in modeling where you rotate and it creates a model around a vector, or they're very mechanical and very precise. This tool, Sculpt Visible Model, is the reason I bought Aspire, because it's very artistic. It's like modeling with clay, and it's one that is worth getting to know and work with, especially if you have an eye. Part of the missing part of it for most people is I'll go through this with them and they don't see what they need to do, and it's just a matter of training your eye to do it. It's the same when I do painting classes. People look at how we paint and they go, well, I didn't look at it that way. They don't see how the colors are different. So let's play with this modeling tool for a few minutes. So I'm going to click on the cow, the base of the cow. I'm going to click on Sculpt Visible Model, and it pops up and it gives me a smoothing tool. It gives a smudging tool, an adding deposit tool, so you can add more stuff on where you want to, a destruction tool, and this is my favorite tool right here, is the undo brush. So if you do something wrong, you can undo it. So we all need this in our life, and then this one here just allows you to move everything around and revisit it. And move this out of the way over to up here for now. So let's take a look at what we want to do with this a little bit. So I'm going to come, the first thing I do when I get these is I'm going to take the smoothing tool, I'm going to make it very strong, and I'm going to come in here and, well, make this back a little bit bigger. And make it very strong, go back to the smoothing tool, and I'm going to soften some of these edges that have been created here. Some of them I don't want to soften, like this stuff right around here. I don't have the tool clicked on right now. I want to leave some of those edges here because we're going to play with those later. But I'm doing all this with my mouse. I have a mouse with a roller bar on it that I'm using. I also have a Wacom pad, but I don't use that much for this, just because I'm not very smooth with it. So we'll just smooth these edges out, blend it a bit. So here's where, let's take a look at this area. This is such a beautiful area up here where all this hair and stuff goes on. Now you could come into this and draw vectors around each of those hairs and get very, very precise with the individual hairs and lay them in here one at a time. You could do that. I'm not inclined to do that. So we're going to work on this hair and this bit of beard down here, and then we're going to come back and recreate the rest of the face. But the first thing I want to do is the hair on the face and around the neck and stuff a little bit. So a couple tools I use to do that. I'm going to use this deposit right now. I'm going to set the strength here. You'll play with this. I'm going to set the smoothness down to almost nothing. And let's zoom in on the face a little bit more. So let's see how all this hair is going to the left, going over to the left on this side, and over here it's coming down and curling around the right. I'm going to lay some of that in here like this, and I'm just going to, and what you can see is it's not happening as heavy as I want. So I'm going to come back here and strengthen that a bit. I want it a little bit smoother than that. We'll push some hair over this way as well. In some places, there's great big lumps of. I know when I paint, a lot of times when I'm painting with people and teaching them to paint, one of the mistakes they make is they want to paint individual hairs. Very seldom do you see individual hairs. Even when you look at all this, every one of these is a clump of hair. I mean, you can see some individual hairs over here sticking out in the sunshine, but almost all of this is clumps of hair, bigger blotches of hair. And there's a couple that come down like this, go different directions. Try to get some of those pretty S curves in there. A couple of them over here. See, there's some that come out here on the ears. The ears, I'm going to use the remove tool for just a minute because I know that I want some of this part of the ear removed. So I'm going to turn it down to not very smooth. I'll show you something here. I'm going to make a big mistake here, quick. So there I've removed too much. So I'm going to come over here and hit the undo. And it takes me right back to where I was. So if you try some of these techniques and you don't like how it worked, you come in here and you hit undo, and it takes it off. So we'll go back and do it. I'm going to take a little bit out of that ear area again because I want some out of there. I don't want it that strong. I want it a little smoother. Do that and do a little bit on this other ear as well. I'm not worried about insects. I know I'm going to cover a lot of this up here pretty soon with some pieces. So I've used the undo brush. I've used the add brush to put some hair in here. And now I'm going to show you my favorite brush for creating hair. It's the smudge brush. So I'm going to use smudge. I'm going to turn it down a little bit. I don't want it too smooth, but let's see what smudge does. Need a little bit more strength. Get over here where maybe you can see it. Smudge will take, it kind of grabs, if you think of this as clay, it kind of grabs it and drags it. And it makes that. It's also when you get to the edges, like out here, if I'm doing some fur on the edge of this critter, when you push it in, let me zoom in on that, when you're doing fur on the edges. Well, you can see it ends very abruptly, but on this picture, you can see it never ends very abruptly. So a couple things, when you're using the smudge, I'll come in here like this, and you want to push back in as well because it creates some real neat, deep. But you can see it won't go beyond the edge of it. So I will come over here and use this very carefully, use this, preserve transparency. Now this means that this edge is no longer viable. So you can grab this smudge and now will go outside of the edge of where you're working. And that's what that preserve transparency does. So where I want some of those little tiny, I don't want too much of that because they're a mess to carve, and they're just, it just makes a mess. You get these little tiny holes in the carving, which you don't want. But sometimes I want that hard, you could draw vector lines forever trying to get all the tiny little smudgy hairlines that you want in there. So then I'll come back and go turn that off back in here, and then you can smudge down into those areas again. And now that's the new perimeter, and it won't go beyond that. So That's an example. Let me back out so you can see what we did there. So we played with making some softer fur on the edge of that handsome fella. So let me go back again and show you. So let's just for a minute. So at this point, if I come back here and I say, I can say keep, or I can just say okay, or you can discard all those changes. If you discard all those changes, all that goes away and you can start over again. But once you hit okay, these are kept. So I'm going to hit okay. And we have that. So now let's take our, took our cow skin and put it back on here. And you can see where we're kind of, the end look we're going for is a combination of building up the actual shape of the cow and then using that cow skin that we created in our very first step just to add some of the real tiny detail that is just hard to do. So go from there. So let's turn that back off again. I'm going to spend a few more minutes. Now I could typically at this point, I will spend probably an hour or two just going through here with these tools, creating what I want in the way of general texture. Want something like this. And if you're doing your family pet or puppy dog or cats, or all this applies, same thing there. You can go through and I'll tend to go through and do a small area all by itself and get it to where I like it. And it's important to, I mean, this is observational art where if I'm going to work down in this area, you don't want, it's easy to just get carried away and start going everywhere and adding in hair. But what you want to do is learn to, let's do like this beard for me. You want to take a look at what's going on in the beard. There's some areas down here with curves. Some of these curves right here are really pretty. There's a hole in this center area here. So, we want to just slow down. This is the slow down part. Let's create that sort of hole in there. Start where there's some sharper edges on this edge over here. You want these models to turn out, it's just one of those things where you sit down and you go, I'm going to spend some time, hours, creating a model. I create models like this, probably a dozen a week for people. Someone calls up with an image and they want a model done, and so I don't know, maybe it's cheap, but 20 to 50 bucks is typical for a model. So, but if you want to do stuff that's yours and you made it, you want to learn this process, especially if you're, for me, I'm an avid hunter and fisherman, and I've been creating wildlife art my whole life. And so I want my models to be my models that I make. So, and if you want to do that, this is kind of part of the journey. Journey is coming in here and learning how to do this. So in that smudging, you see I have the diameter set pretty high and smoothness. So I would, you can see there's a, you get very detailed with getting those pretty curves and stuff in here. Now, I haven't finished, the nose still needs to be built here, so I'm not, that's going to come here in a few minutes, I think. But I wanted to show you some of this smudging process. And there's those pretty curves. If you're doing humans, this Humans are, I believe, the toughest thing because obviously whoever you're doing them for, they know exactly what that person looks like. Dogs are hard to do too because pets are very, very personal, and you all know the personalities of their faces and all the little. We can put way too much detail into these when you look at how small this is. What kind of lines I'm making with smudging. You can get into where it's almost individual hairs, and it's annoying. So I will also go back and like what I know for back off here a little bit. So I know that there's some raised areas here on the chin that I didn't get. So I mean, I'll go back in and set the add feature, and I'll add a little bit of raised dimension there. Okay, so I'm going to take a break from that for a few minutes. We're going to go back and finish up some of the Again, we'll flip the skin on just really quick so you can see what direction that's going. You can kind of see where this guy is starting to head towards. I need to do some rounding and shifting over here, and there's some details around the eye, although the eyes are just barely visible in this handsome dude. But so what I'll probably do right now is I'll pause this video and I'll get this guy finished up, and I'll come back in and show you how the modeling part of it wrapped up before I glue it all together. Go back over to what I'm going to do is go back over to some of these areas over here and get the nose added in and the hoofs and the lower leg bells. There's some beautiful bells and stuff on there, but I got to draw some more vectors and do that. And we'll go from there. So when I do have to go back in, you recognize like for this one, this whole area around his nose has been lost. I didn't create a vector for that yet, so I would zoom in on that. Here I am going to just draw this vector in pretty quick with the. It's one of my favorite new tools that Vectric put out a couple of updates ago. Is what they gave us the ability to hit tab and it ends it. And you can see I kind of I lost edge of that, so I'm going to come back here and hit the node edit because I went further than I wanted to go. Just pull those nodes in tighter there. Node editing is just a painful price you have to pay to deal with this kind of software. It's just the reality of it. It's not my favorite part of it, but I do love the results. So we'll go back into modeling quick. I'm going to add a couple of, let's add that nose in. We'll hit, well, first off, close. Let's turn our cow back on so you can see what happens. We're going to add the nose in. And now if it's way more nose than we need, he doesn't need that kind of a nose job. I don't want to see that curve there. That line is there that's showing up. So there's a couple ways to deal with it. I can push this back into where it's not additive anymore, but it's going to mean I'm going to have to push you can see 2 inches isn't enough to get that to come out as far as I want it to come out. So I'm going to go I'm going to manually force it out a bit further. I put 2.2 on it and hit apply, and that should lift it up a little bit more. Okay. So there's this, and I think this probably I'm going to go to 0.24 on the actual height of that. Now we have sort of the, let's see, scale that to the exact height. I'm going to have it go steep. I want the edges of it steeper. So I'm actually gonna make the actual nose part a little bit higher, and then we can shorten this back down a bit. All right. These are all things that you'll learn to play with and get your own sort of sense of how you like how that looks. So there's his sort of his nose there. Let's call that nose. I have some nostrils here, so let's put those in quick. So to get those, we're going to have to drop this into it. Now watch how deep they go. This said it's a couple inches. We'll put that on. It's way too much. There we go. That will be nostrils. There's a couple of flares down here I want to play with on his front legs. And I got to go back to where I was again because I do want those. I'm going to use this because there's only one element down here in the legs. I do want those to sit on top of the, so I'm going to leave it in this combine mode. Make it just a little bit bigger than that. Call that left knee. Start a new component. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Apply. Call that one right knee. These are the hoofs down here. So what I want to do with those is I'm going to tilt that a little bit. And pull it back into the model a touch. Tilt it a bit more. And there is the kind of the effect I'm going for on those hooves. So we're going to start a new one. The same settings here. I'm going to have to come up a bit more because it's smaller. But you can see that way we get a little bit of it. Looks like a hoof coming out of the, and then we'll put hair all around those and make that look better as we go along. Let's grab these two quick. Let's try to do those at the same time. Sometimes I think they just warrant being done separately. So, okay, so let's call those right. Ask because it's both of them. Start a new component. So if you and now added all these other things here. So let me go up and show you. I'm going to go back in and I'm going to insert a new level. I'm going to use the create a component, a visible model of the component again. So we've now doubled it. You can see there's two of them there because I have to turn off level 2. And let's call this rename cow base 2. So there's our cow base 2. Now I want to show you something that, again, this is a new feature. I'm going to turn the cow skin on. Now what I want to do is model the shape of his body, but I don't want to do any damage to this micro detail that shows up from the cow skin. So I'm going to show you one of the wonderful things about how Aspire works now. So we're going to click on the cow base, and I'm going to make some changes to the toes down here. I'm going to come up here to sculpt middle visible model. So what's happening right now is I'm actually sculpting only the base. It won't touch, but you can still see um, you can still see the skin, right? So let's say I want to make those toes a little bit more pointed. So I'm going to grab this, and I'm going to grab that whole toe, and I'm going to go like that. Made it a little bit more pointed. And it didn't affect any of the detail of those that's on the skin. It just affects what's on the under layer. So I can carve and model and detail that. So if let's say, for example, I come up here and I want to play with these beautiful hairy legs that are here on these knees that look so really cool on the. Let me back out of here for just a minute. So you can watch what I'm doing. So you can see why I'm doing this. But here's the actual model on this. So we'll go back, and again, I'm just going to click on the cow base. I've left these two separated, so the skin is not being modified. So what you can do, the other thing, let me show you the other part is that you can do, let's say that on these horns up here, I don't like, the skin has some flat plots on it right there. See that flat edge right there that I don't like? So let's just model. Now I'm not going to touch the base when I model this time. All I'm playing with is the skin. So I'm using the smoothing. Let's say I don't want some of this, but some of the texture that shows up on that skin when I create it, and go, well, that's a little too much. I'm going to instead, well, this doesn't touch any part of the model underneath. It only plays with the skin. So, again, here I have some stuff right there I don't like, so I'll hit there and I can touch only the skin and not the underlying model. And then I'll go back to that and say, okay. And I'm going to go back to the base, and I'm going to finish all the places where I feel that I don't have enough strength showing up. And fortunately, with the skin visible now, I can see where I want to support some of the stuff that's going on in that beautiful texture. I want to help strengthen it here a little bit. That whole area in here, I'm going to round that down a little bit. Now, so that's sort of the basic of how I put a model together. Now, from this point on, like I'd want more roundness in his belly right here. I'm going to work on the details around the face a bit more, push these ears back in a little bit. But you can kind of see where this old Highland cow's going. And I don't think you need to sit here and watch me do a whole lot more pen strokes on this thing, but that's sort of where it's going. And in the end, there's an underlying model that we're shaping with these sculpting tools. You can see I've done really nothing back here, and there's quite a bit of texture back here that could use a little bit of help from the modeling tools. And yeah, that's kind of the basics of building one of these more complicated animal models. So there you go. If you have questions, drop me a note sometime, and we'll go from there. So let me